Hi, it's Mrs. Murray here. I'm just making a little video for you to help you with colons, semicolons and dashes. So let me just share a little PowerPoint I've got that I want to go through with you quickly. It's not going to be a long one, but what I'm thinking about is with writing being such an important part of paper 1 and paper 2 for language. It's really important that you try and use a variety of different punctuation because you know that certainly in question 5 that a large amount of marks are there available for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So it's something that we really need to think about and using these correctly. Okay, so let's have a little reminder. What do we know about these 3 punctuation marks? I'm thinking about a colon, a semicolon or a dash. Okay, so what do we use colons for? Well, a colon can be used to introduce a list, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute, or it can separate 2 independent clauses, but when the second part of the sentence, the second clause, explains or illustrates the first. I'll show you an example, don't worry. What are semicolons for? They can separate items in a list, or this is where we most commonly use them, to separate 2 closely related independent clauses instead of using a conjunction. So if we were going to use, and again, I'll show you an example, rather than using the conjunction in the middle of the sentence, we can use a semicolon instead. It's an easy thing to do. And dashes, one of my particular favourites. I love a good dash. They indicate parenthesis within a sentence, and that's kind of like instead of brackets. Okay, so what does this look like? So before we go any further, we've got to think about what an independent clause is, because we're going to separate independent clauses. So what do I mean by that? Well, an independent clause is a clause that can stand on its own, all right? It needs to make sense. So, for example, the safari was amazing. It makes sense on its own. That's an independent clause. It doesn't need anything else. An independent clause always has a subject, and the subject of that sentence was the safari, and the verb was, okay, a complete thought. So that's what it needs to stand on its own. So, for example, my dog loves bananas. That's an independent clause. It makes sense in its own right. We visited London. Makes sense? Yes, it does. It's an independent clause. When we visited London, does that make sense on its own? No, it needs more. We will go to the moon does make sense on its own. When we visited London, needs more information. It doesn't stand alone. It's what we call a subordinate clause, and it needs more words with it. It needs more. It doesn't stand on its own. It's not independent. If we go to the moon, subordinate. If we go to the moon is not a complete thought. It's not a sentence that makes sense. And the same with because my dog loves bananas doesn't make sense on its own. Okay, and there's just the simple difference between independent and subordinate clauses. In a nutshell, an independent clause makes sense on its own, a subordinate clause doesn't. Okay, so do they link? What we're focusing on is joining 2 independent clauses. They must make sense on their own, but they also must be linked in some way if we're going to use a semicolon or a colon or a dash. Right, let's have a look. James enjoys playing tennis. He doesn't like football. Okay, we could have used, let me just go through this. What could we use? Okay, what are the best things to use there? Right, James enjoys playing tennis. We could have had a dash or the semicolon. He doesn't like football. They're linked and they're independent. He doesn't like football. James enjoys playing tennis. He was late for school. His alarm clock hadn't gone off. Right, instead of a full stop where we just have 2 short sentences, we could have had the colon, the semicolon, or the dash. After school, I played outside. Tomorrow is my birthday. Now, they both make sense, but they're not linked, are they? That's why we'd have to have a full stop in that third one. After school, I played outside is one independent thought. Tomorrow is my birthday is a different one. Lilies are my favourite flowers. They smell awful though. Now you can see we could use one of these three because the thoughts are linked, aren't they? Tennis, football, linked. Late for school, alarm clock, linked. Playing outside and birthday, not linked, therefore we need the full stop. Lilies, smell, they're linked, okay? And that's how we can use the colon, the semicolon, or the dash in the middle instead of a full stop or a conjunction. We could have had lilies are my favourite flowers, but they smell awful, yeah? Okay, right, so let's have a look at these. Where should the semicolons be in the following sentence? James enjoys playing tennis, semicolon. He doesn't like football. Now, the semicolon is in the middle of the two independent clauses. I enjoyed my swim this morning. I felt exhausted afterwards. It connects the two independent clauses. The witch lives in a small cottage in the woods. The dragon lives in a cave. All right, it makes perfect sense. It's where the conjunction or the full stop would go. That's where the semicolon goes, linking the two sentences. Right, colons. He was late for school. His alarm clock hadn't gone off. Where does it go? In the middle. He was late for school. Independent clause. His alarm clock hadn't gone off. It's exactly the same look as the semicolon. I have very little time to learn French. The school trip is in a few weeks. We can see that the two are linked and we've got a colon in the middle. Independent clauses. Can you see that they both make sense on their own? You need to clean the fish tank out. The water is getting murky. It's just instead of using full stops all the time, guys, isn't it? That's the thing. Dashes, they do a very similar thing. Look, lilies are my favourite flowers. They smell awful though. My younger brother can be good fun. He can also be a complete pain at times. I enjoy playing on my trampoline. I can jump higher than my sister. Right, independent clauses, two independent clauses, and we separate them with a dash. The point here is that we've got a choice. We don't have to use full stops all the time, do we? We can use the semicolon, the colon, or the dash to link our sentences together. Okay. Right. Tell me if I'm right with these. What do we think of these sentences? We often go to the library on Tuesdays. We choose lots of new books. Wendy was excited about the trip to the aquarium. She mostly wanted to see the sharks. My sister really likes ice cream. Her favourite colour is strawberry. Now, we've got a problem here. These independent clauses have been separated by a comma. We can't do this. We call this a comma splice. All right. We cannot use a comma to separate two independent clauses, two sentences that make sense. That's why we'd need to use a colon or a semicolon or a dash. The choice is yours. But these, one of the most common errors that I see when marking is this use of the comma splice. We often go to the library on Tuesdays. We choose lots of new books, but we need something stronger than the comma. The comma does not work in that sentence. We can't have a comma separating two sentences that make sense in their own right. Comma splicing. Okay, let's have a quick look at this, guys. The school fair was a huge success. Over £800 was raised for the new library. A colon works there. Trekking through the jungle was exhausting. The hikers were worn out. Now, we could have had a full stop. We could have had a conjunction. Trekking through the jungle was exhausting and the hikers were worn out. What I suggest to you is when you've done some writing, when you go back and proofread and you might have written that sentence with an and, simply cross it out and replace it with a semicolon, because we're desperately trying to get that range of punctuation in your writing, which is going to move you up that mark scheme. Ava really disliked banana milkshake. She said it tasted like smelly socks. The dash works perfectly in that sentence. Remember, a comma wouldn't have worked in that sentence because they both make sense. They're both independent. I spend the afternoon playing tennis. My arm was aching this evening. Right, it's linked, semicolon. Just trying to think of doing something a bit different. What about this then? Fred was late for school. He'd missed the bus. Right, guys, that's the comma splice. Fred was late for school. He had missed the bus. All right, we need some stronger punctuation there, not the comma. We cannot use the comma, remember, simple rule for two independent clauses. I've never liked mushrooms. I think they're like slimy slugs in your mouth. Correct. Look, the dash works perfectly. Two independent sentences that make sense. Putting up the tent is always hard work. Forgetting the pegs makes it even harder than usual. Right. Could we have used a comma? No, that's a splice. We need a semicolon in the middle there because they both make sense. Putting up the tent is always hard work, full stop. Forgetting the pegs made it even harder than usual, full stop. Could be two independent sentences, couldn't it? Or we link them with the semicolon, or the dash would have worked beautifully as well. The one piece of punctuation that won't work though is the comma. All right, the comma splice. Um, Matching these. Okay, walking is great exercise, colon. It's an inexpensive way to keep fit. We enjoy spending time in the museum, semicolon. The dinosaurs are my favourite part. The choir were overjoyed, colon. They came first in the national competition. I don't like sharing a room with my brother. Dash, he's the messiest person in the world. All of those bits of punctuation work there. The only thing that won't is the comma. That would be the comma splice. Okay, just remember, if they both make sense, the comma isn't the right piece of punctuation. Okay, guys, I hope that helped you a little bit with trying to work out, which bits of punctuation to use. Best of luck with the language exams.